Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jennifer Thornton. Jennifer is a leadership coach and founder of 304 Coaching. She spent more than 20 years as an HR professional and in operations before starting her consulting business. Jennifer helps leaders and companies who are undergoing breakthrough growth and accelerated hiring patterns. She says that running a high-performance team always boils down to two things: adopting a perfect fit hiring process and developing each hire. I'm excited to have Jennifer on the show to talk more about the HR side of leadership. So, Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show. You're the first HR professional that has been on the show. So this is going to be kind of fun, and we're probably going to have some good back and forth dialogue. So I'm really interested in this. But as we started off, we talked a little bit, and you had a long, successful career as an HR professional and in operations. So that's one thing I didn't know about you before we started, but you were also in operations. So you have like both sides of the fence. You've seen kind of both things, but why did you leave that all behind to start your own business? What was the genesis for that?
So I think that so often in our life, we have that moment where you can remember everyone in the room, you can remember the sounds and the smells. And I had one of those. And I was working for a large company, and I happened to be in Hong Kong, and we had new executives, and the person walked in the room, and every piece of my being said, "Oh, I'm done. Like, this is it. Like, this is just not the direction I want to take my career." I was getting to that point in my age where I knew it was the right time to kind of go out on my own. And what I had fallen in love with, and where my passion, because, like you said, I did operations for the first half of my career. So I woke up to my scorecard every morning, making sure the sales and payroll. And then I went to HR and did more of that deployment and that strategy. And what I really found is that leaders were successful when they thought about their talent strategically, and when they thought about the relationships of those executives really strategically. And that, it wasn't just bodies and seats, and it wasn't just people doing their job. It was a strategic deployment of talent. And it's what I love to do. And so at that moment, I was like, this is what I was meant to do. And I'm going to fly home and do that. And that is what I did.
Wow. So you just said, that's it, I'm done, and walked out.
Well, I didn't completely walk out, but I would never do that on a job. Much more professional, but I worked towards it. I was gone in 6 months.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's good. But in your mind at that point, that was the beginning of the
Every
transfer.
bit of it. Yeah, every bit of it. It was one of those moments I'll never forget.
So it's funny. One of my moment is very easy to remember too, because I was working in a facility that had very low morale. I wasn't the senior person on that particular site, but part of my group was there, and they had an annual meeting where they were doing all the goal setting for the year. Mm-hmm. And they said, we're going to give you a gift this year. That was the big thing. And then we all show up, and they give us a button that said, "I love my job."
I love that. That's hysterical.
And it was at that point I said, I don't think I could do corporate anymore. I think I'm done with big companies. I mean, that's just kind of a crazy thing, So
yeah, that's an interesting gift. But all of those things, people think about leadership, and those small things you think, oh, we're just going to give people a button, but we don't really think about what that means and how that may impact someone's decisions at work. And, it was that turning moment for you, and who knows who else in the room.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of people after that.
Yeah.
So, but so you deal with helping companies in their hiring process and doing it strategically and making sure they build up they think strategically about their talent. And I really like this because I really do believe that leadership is a people business, right? And you've got to put the right team together if you're going to be successful. So, what are some of the biggest problems you see in most companies' hiring processes? What's the biggest challenges today that you see?
I think there's a few things. And, one of the things I see most often is we don't get clear on the work. Like, we'll do a job description, right? And we'll list out the things, but really, what is the work that needs to be done? And how does that work impact others? And, really, before we hire someone, we have to stop and pause and think about the work. And I also see, especially in fast growing companies, or when a company's in stress, they'll say, oh, that team's overwhelmed, just hire someone for them. But they don't really stop and say, is there work that needs to be moved off the plate? Is there work that
Mm,
someone else can do? Are they overwhelmed because we are not communicating to them well? And so it's really about getting clear on the work and how are we setting up people to be successful in that work.
mm,
Then once we kind of work through that process and we get really clear on the work, when we go to hire, interviewing people is really interesting because you can interview for experience and knowledge and skill set and those behavior based interviews and all that stuff we're supposed to do, right? You can do all that, but usually what's missing is a really good high validated EEOC compliant assessment, because we're not self-aware enough as humans to really understand our traits. And so I think that's one of the pieces that's missing with most of the processes is a validated tool to make sure that we're covering all bases, because
mm.
you really can't interview for work behavior traits and decision style.
Interesting. That is so true. It's interesting. One of my observations in big companies is that we did spend. It seemed like we spent a lot of work, a lot of time interviewing and trying to find the right person for the job.
Mhm.
But then when we gave them, we hired this really, this star, right? That had all the pedigree and the experience, and it was the perfect fit, right?
Mhm.
And we would bring them in the organization and we'd throw them in a cubicle and say, good luck. And there really wasn't any, I would say, just talent development or even talent connection. We didn't grow new hires. And, over time, those new hires who were rock stars who wanted to do great things got frustrated and they moved on to other opportunities. So, I think you even mentioned it, in my opening. I talked a little bit about in the opening that it's about not just hiring the right people, but also developing the talent once they come in the organization. Is that right?
Absolutely. And onboarding is an important piece, because when you onboard people in a way that helps them acclimate to your culture, it
Mm,
helps them understand who their key business partners are, who their support is. No one goes into a cubicle and like hides, like, you don't. And so you have to know what's around you. And so I think so often we don't put the upfront work into a great onboarding plan,
mm,
and we either teach them nothing and hope they figure it out, or we teach them too much in the first week and they can't remember anything. Like, you have
right.
to work people into it. And then it is about that ongoing development. People we're humans, and as humans, growth and taking our brain and using our brain, all that is important to us.
Mm,
And if an organization doesn't allow someone to expand their mind and grow and develop, even if they're in an individual contributor job that they want to do forever, you still have to be able to expand your mind inside of that. And I think that's a big piece that we miss, is we don't
mm.
really think about how to help people get that learning and that stuff that they're really craving, to grow and to stay really satisfied within their job.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I see that where we hire somebody for their talent and their brain, and we tell them that you're not allowed to do anything. You have to get my
Yeah.
permission first, which is like drives me crazy. Like,
Yeah.
this guy's a rock star.
Yeah.
This girl's a rock star. Let her do what she's gonna do, right? Instead, we
Yeah.
put them in a box. We say, and you can't do
Mhm.
anything without our permission,
Yeah.
and then we frustrate these people, and they all start their own businesses eventually. I think so.
Absolutely.
So,
And the other thing that happens when we don't let people make decision, then they stop
mm,
doing it. When I get a call from a CEO and they're
yeah, yeah,
frustrated with their talent, I always say, tell me what's making you crazy about your team. And on
yeah,
the list mostly is they don't make decisions on their own. And
yeah.
after they give me the list, the next question I always ask is, tell me, what about your leadership creates this environment?
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Because usually it's the case where they're not allowed to make a decision, and that's why
Yeah.
they don't make a decision. So yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So you touched on it a little bit. I mean, the hiring process and bringing in talent and talent development is, would you say is it's a critical part of building and maintaining the company culture?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to think about the people you're bringing in, because not only do you have to think about what work they'll do, you also have to think about how do we do that work.
Mm,
And so sometimes, organizations are very traditional and that's right for their business, and they want a traditional, more formal approach. And so you may hire someone that has all the experience and knowledge you need, but how they want to do the work doesn't match your culture. So they become disruptive. You get the reputation for not hiring well. The person's not happy. And as leaders, we can't forget every single time we hire someone, we change the course of their life. That is on their resume the rest of their lifetime. And we have to take that really seriously. And so, if you want to hire someone, don't just stop at skills. Really think about, how do people, work that are successful in your culture? And then how do you look at your candidates and, ask questions so that you can ensure that they're going to work that way too. Because we hire people for skills and knowledge, but we say goodbye to people because of how they actually did the work.
So true.
And that's the piece that we miss out in the process.
So true. So true. So, as you look at, you mentioned something about going back and asking the leader the question, what in your leadership style might be causing this problem, but what are some of the biggest challenges you see in company leadership today? What are they missing out on when it comes to talent acquisition and development?
So, one thing that I always find that's interesting about leaders is, when you think about starting a company, no one wakes up and says, I'm just going to grab a bunch of really smart people and I'm going to lead the heck out of them. No one does that. Everyone's like, wants to start a business, and then you have to hire people to run that business. So, leadership isn't a business, it's, but it's the critical action to create a business. And I think we always need to start to remind ourselves of that. I think that, the current trend that, here we are closing out the end of 2020. And one of the things that I've seen, in fact, had a conversation with the CEO just last week about this. At the beginning of the year, we had to do a lot of crisis management, shutdowns, closures, and crisis management is buildings on fire, get out. No questions, no discussion, just do as I'm told. And I think our leaders gotten a little bit of a habit of crisis management, and crisis management only works in a crisis. And it's really dangerous to an environment outside of a crisis. And so what I'm finding is that people are in that mode, and now they're really damaging their team dynamics because they're crisis managing outside of a crisis. And we have to stop that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, when we talked about, I had a lot of guests on in the early stages of COVID, and, it was really important that you manage through the crisis, right? And, and what I was kept talking about was being present. We had to be present as leaders, as our people are trying to go through this major shift and change. And it didn't matter what you did, what kind of career you had, you went through some sort of a change during this period. And so, I always talked about, being present. But even as we come out of this thing and we get into some level of, normal operations, I think being present as a leader is still an important part of it, right? Is being there, being present, even if you're doing Zoom calls, right? So, but at least you're there and connecting with people. So I think one of the sad things I saw in the early part of the crisis is that people were trying to manage it with emails, trying to manage their people, through emails and dictates, and it's just, you can't do that. You got to be present. You got to connect with people, even with the challenges that we have. So yeah, but I think you're right. We're getting back to kind of, we're out of the crisis mode, or we're moving out of the crisis mode. We're in a new, we're operating our business in a new way, right? But so then we got to get back to the basics again. We can't be just running around. The building's not on fire anymore, right? So we got to get going. So that's a really important thing. So I want to touch on something you wrote some pieces, and you've had some discussions about this idea, and I wanted to talk to you about it because I saw it a lot in the companies I work for. It's this idea of companies or people being addicted to being right. So what is that all about? I really liked it when I heard it, because I've been in those meetings where we just argued about who was right versus what we really needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, you could get those people that will argue, what color the sky is, and they're convinced it's purple, and you're like, no, it's really blue. So what's interesting about the human mind, and a lot of the work I do is around the neuroscience of the mind, how it takes in language, what are the chemicals that fire off, and then how does that impact our relationships and therefore our business. And so, one of the things that we know from research is that when you are right, you get a dopamine hit.
Mm,
And because it feels good to be right, you're like, yes, I was smart. I made the right decision. It went well. My boss told me I was awesome. And you get this dopamine hit. Well, that's the same dopamine hit you would get if you were addicted to shopping or sugar or alcohol. It's that chemical reaction in your mind. And if you hooked your brain up, to all the little, electrical things, and you gave people that were addicted to many different things, including being right, and you looked at a screen and you gave them their substance of choice, it would fire off the exact same way when you're addicted to being right.
mm,
And what we know about addictions is you need more and more of that dopamine to get the same level of high. So therefore, that person you worked with, it was an up and comer and always right and got tons of accolades. And now you see them 10, 15 years later and you're like, who is this person?
mm,
They don't listen anymore. They're not open to new ideas. They don't collaborate. They're just not who they used to be. And it's because they are in their addiction
mm.
and they have to be right. So anytime that someone else tells them a different, viewpoint, then it takes away their drug of choice.
Mm.
And that's a problem.
It really is. And, it's funny because when I started writing on leadership, one of the first analogies I tried to talk about was, I'm a former submarine officer. I was in the military, and we always said that the enemy was outside the hull, right? Whether it was it was during the Cold War, whether it was the Soviets or thousands of pounds of seawater trying to get in the boat, the enemy was outside the four walls. So we had to operate as a team to be able to make sure the enemy stayed outside of the hull, right? And when I worked in corporate America, it was sort of just the opposite. It seemed like the enemy was inside the four walls, right? It was always marketing's fault, or it was engineering's fault, or sales promised something, or QA rejected something. And it was always this fight amongst each other and then when it came to budgeting, who was going to get all the funding for next year? Is it going to be the European team, the US team, or, it was always just arguing, fighting. And I saw a lot of people fighting for just to be right, or just to protect their little kingdoms. And at the end of the day, we weren't focused on the enemy being our competition that was taking our share, taking share away from us and affecting our livelihood. So I think I see this especially in big companies, that the bigger you get, the more you get these kingdoms, and you have the heads of the kingdoms fighting for their little piece of turf. And it's this fight sometimes, like you say, just to be right.
Yeah, it's just to be right. And it's, that situation, you put 10 executives at the table, and they're all fighting for their kingdom, then no one's fighting for the greater good of the organization. And I see that all the time. And they then protect their teams. They're not honest with team performance. They're not willing to help out. And if your executives around the table act that way, how do you think your directors will act?
Yeah.
Wherefore, how are your managers and your individual contributors? They hear and see how you talk about the other group. So therefore, they're going to follow you. They're the leader. They're going to follow your way of work and
Right.
believe what you tell them to be true. And I think it's one of the biggest failures in corporate is that we fight for our own team. We don't fight for the greater good.
Yeah. And honestly, I tried to fix it when I
Yeah.
was in corporate America. I was always the guy trying to find the compromise and try to find a situation where you win, I win, and the company wins. I was always trying to find those opportunities. And in some cases, people took offense that I was actually trying to be a peacemaker and trying to bring people together, because they thought I was, well, you're just doing this just for you or something like that. And I was like, no, I'm actually trying to focus on, being successful as a company, not so much about my department. And that was always, I don't know, it's a very strange thing to me. And maybe it's because of my background in the military, but I just never could quite understand the finger pointing and the infighting and the politics that went along with large companies.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And a lot of it comes from fear. And,
Mm-hmm.
when we are in fear, our primitive brain takes over. And, that part of our brain was created to keep us alive. And how we did that in our, early infancies, it kept us in the cave and it kept us in a tribe because we could not survive by ourselves without, shelter and water. You just couldn't do it all by yourself. Well, how
Right.
that shows up in today's world is you're still tribal.
Right.
And so if you feel like your tribe's messed up or you feel like you're going to get voted off the tribe, your fear kicks in and you do finger pointing. Because if I blame someone else, then clearly I'm
Right.
safe in my tribe.
Right. Right.
You make decisions around a leader because, hey, the tribal leader said, don't like those departments. It's marketing's fault, not our fault. So therefore your brain believes it. And so it's really interesting when you think about how our brains were created to keep us alive and to keep fear as the mechanism, to keep us from dying, how it actually shows up in the workplace. And you can just see it everywhere. And it's really just how the human brain was created. And that's why I spend so much time working with people to teach them how does the brain actually work so that you can
Mm,
lead with the brain and not against the brain.
I like
Because
that.
we really, the 20th century leadership was fear based. And so we create this fear and we put people in this state of where they really can't do their best work because their
Mm.
primitive brain is taken over their thinking.
Well, and not to get into politics, but I think it's happened as a country as well. So, so it's it's
Yes.
funny because I see it in and maybe it's because I don't know, but I see it the same way you do. I see tribalism. I see the primitive brain in almost everything that we do. It's either you're on one side or in the other side, And the fact is that we should be on the same side, right? As far as a nation, but we're not. We have to be on one tribe or the other tribe. And if you indicate any interest in being agreeing with someone in the other tribe, then you're shunned from this tribe. And so you see that in politics and in the culture in the US today, but you definitely see it in companies. You absolutely see it. I remember, I was running an engineering team, a global engineering team at a very large company. And I had one guy who 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 always thought I was trying to undermine him. He was my next door neighbor. He was in the office next to me, and he ran all the manufacturing engineering for the global unit. And I ran the R&D, and he always thought I was undermining him because I was part of another tribe. And I was like no, let's go to lunch. Let's have a relationship. I'm not undermining you at all. We're like, if we work together, we can be much more successful. But it was like I was in a different tribe and he was programmed not to like me because I was in the tribe. It was really bizarre. But you see that primitive brain kick in when um, especially when it's allowed, right? When leaders don't step up and say, guys, you're on the same team. There and sometimes, at least I saw in this organization, it had to go too far up to the top to connect it to, someone who can make a decision, right? When you have these silos in an organization that are built up, I think it gets to be even more. At least, in the companies I worked with where we had a general manager and you had all the functions working for them, you had like a referee, like, stop fighting. This is our mission. This is our goal. This is what we're going to do. Right. And so I think that was, and that's the role I played most of my career. I was that general manager. And that was just I was that guy that said, stop fighting. This is the enemy is our competition. Right. And this is very interesting. So, I was going to interesting because of your background, because you were in operations and you're HR. This is kind of an interesting question. What do you think about, whose responsibility is it really to develop people? Is it HR's responsibility, or should the leader be developing their people?
Absolutely. The lion's share of that work is the leader.
Mm,
And, I think, good HR departments are talent strategists. And they're there to support the leader to be a great leader. They're not there to do the leader's job. And they're not there to deliver the bad news when the leader doesn't have the guts to be honest.
mm,
And, so often, even, when I was in that seat in a corporate environment, I'd get a phone call, Bobby didn't do his job today. I want you to go down there and tell Bobby to do his job. And I'm
right,
like,
right.
yeah, I'm going to pass on that, but I'd be
Yeah.
more than welcome or happy to role play with you. And we can talk about how you can tell Bobby to do his job.
Mm,
and, really pushing back and helping. But I, I think a lot of times leaders don't do it. One, because they are in fear. They don't know how to. And I always, with my teams, I was like, it's not about helping them fight the fight. It's about giving them the confidence and tools so that they can go and have those conversations. They can go and develop their team. And you're providing guidance and confidence and a safe space to work through it, but you're not actually doing it.
Mm.
And I think really strong, and where really a progressive HR team needs to be is that place, helping leaders be great leaders. And HR should be a challenger when a leader is doing something and they need a safe place to think about options, or they need to hear the truth. HR should be a person who can come and keep that confidence, but be very honest with leaders and say, I know, here's the decision you brought to the table. I'm going to help you play these out. And I think so often HR professionals aren't willing to tell the truth because, again, they're in fear of their job if they tell the truth. But when I see really strong executives who take HR into their realm and create this partnership and this honesty and allow someone to just kind of be there as your second, voice in your head, that's when it becomes really powerful. And that's when leaders start to grow and then they lead their teams. It's not pushed off to, the policy police. I've never been a policy police HR person, but there's a lot of them out there. And
Yes.
some organizations want that, and that's up to them. Not how I would lead a business, not how I would do the job. But I think that when you invite them in and allow them to be a business strategist with you, that's when the relationship's really great.
I agree. So a question,
Mm-hmm.
and this could get us in trouble, but
Oh,
what's
good.
your opinion about performance reviews?
Oh my gosh, performance reviews. I have a lot of opinions about them. I think that they are a lazy way out. I think that, there needs to be some kind of mechanism. If your company does merits, there needs to be some level setting. But these people who, once a year, everyone has to go and do their performance and everyone's dread it and everyone's complaining about it, that you're not, it's just an exercise. Like who cares? You're not making progress with the business. And so when I think about the effort that goes into performance reviews 1 or 2 times a year, what if we took that and we spread it across 12 months and that we really worked with leaders to give continuous feedback? Because if you gave continuous feedback, you don't need an end of year surprise got you performance review. And if you do a traditional performance review, it shouldn't be a surprise. Anyone who is surprised at their performance review, the leader owns that. The leader had not or did not, have honest conversations. And it's really unfair on that person. Don't show up and tell me 12 months later, you don't like what I've been doing. I've been more than happy to change it along the way. But I think in today's world, because we're busy, we're overwhelmed, all that stuff, we use it as a crutch. And when you use it as a crutch, it doesn't work.
That's the right answer, by the way.
Oh, good. I'm glad
so
I got it right.
I had the right answer in my head, and you got it, which is
yes.
No.
What would have happened if I had given the wrong one?
You would have been fine. No, I feel the same way about it. It got to be where it was such a corporate top-down kind of thing that we did, and it came from on high that your distributions look a certain way. You can't have a certain amount of people that say you're grading 1 to 4. You only could have like 2% of your people were a 4. You should have 25% as a 3. You should have 20. And it was like, well, wait, I actually have rock stars here. I did a really good job hiring. I did a really good job talent development. I did everything you told me to do. I have a rock star team, and yet I have a distribution where I have to have a certain amount of people that are basically on the low end and, potentially not getting a raise. And I never could quite understand that, and then when you bring it up to the HR department, they're like, well, we're just following orders from corporate, and that's the distribution curve we're supposed to have. And it's like, I don't know about that. So
yeah, it's interesting you say that and tell that story. This year, I worked with a really large global communication organization. And one of the things we did is we looked at their performance review process and redid it and
Mm.
kind of blew it up and put it back together. And we did put it back together in something that felt a little traditional. But one of the things that we did is we removed the bell curve.
Mm.
That idea that, 10% and 50, and, that you had to have these
Yeah.
because, and how we looked at it is there will be years where you will have a rock star team.
Yeah.
And but then the next year you may not, because maybe
Yeah.
some of those got promoted, and this next year you may have, teams that are kind of finding their way and new. And so you may not have that. You may have, some on the lower end heavy. And so instead of forcing a bell curve, we had them really think about their team collectively and what was the stage of that team, and were they truly, in that moment of time of, excellent performance, or were they at a moment of time of building and maybe the team wasn't great.
Mm.
But that's okay, because maybe they were great last year and again they got promoted or it changed around. But it was that one of the pieces that we took out was the forced bell curve, and then we asked leaders to really get honest. And it'll be hard for them, because not only do they have to get honest, they have to get honest telling someone their
Right.
performance.
Right. Well,
And
and the
that's
other
the
thing,
hard part.
yeah, and the other thing is the person above them has to know enough about them and their team to be able to say, wait a second, you've got all top performers in your team, then how come you're not your department or your business is subpar performance? So having someone enough to push back a little bit and say, okay, there's no forced bell curve, but yet you're giving everybody the top rating, but yet I'm not seeing the performance out of your team. Now, is it you?
Yeah.
Is it you, the leader, that's the problem, or
Mhm.
what is the problem? Because I think we have to be able to question that if we see something that's unusual. But I
Mhm.
was frustrated with when you do everything right, you hire right, you develop right, you build really good people, and then you were told that 10% or 15% have to have the lowest rating. And I was always just like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense in my mind. So it
No,
made
it's
it,
a
it made it
really old
hard.
way to look at it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
made it really hard to lead when you couldn't lead the way you wanted to lead. And I think that's probably some of those things drove me towards starting my own business and doing it the way I want to do it. So, and by the way, I don't have performance reviews in my company
Good.
because I talk to my employees every single day.
Yes.
So, and if
They
they're
don't.
doing bad, I let them know. And if they're doing great, I do the same. So,
That's
and
right. And I think it's so powerful when you get used to having those conversations,
mm,
because then it's not like, uh-oh, I got in trouble from my boss today. It's like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to grow.
right.
I also find that organizations that celebrate failure, they grow faster, because it says because the opposite of innovation is kind of failure. So you
Mm,
can't innovate if you're
yeah.
not comfortable with failure. And so I love when I talk to people and they're like, I want a really innovative team. And I'm like, fantastic. When they screw up, what are you going to do? Well, they better
Yeah.
not. I'm like, well, then they're not going to innovate,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you have those constant performance conversations, growth becomes okay, and it becomes celebrated. And then you're building a culture of growth because people are honest about how they're doing or how their peer is doing. And it just really changes the culture that way.
Absolutely. I've seen a culture where we had a CEO that said, move fast, fix it along the way. And he said, the worst thing you can do in my business, it's not making a wrong decision or making the right decision. It's not making a decision. He said, make a decision and fix it along the way. And he had an organization that was very nimble. We had a very small corporate staff and we were growing like crazy. And it's because he gave the power as low in the organization as possible. And he had grace and forgiveness for when you made a mistake. He said, fix it. If you make a mistake, admit you made a mistake and fix it. That's what I pay you to do. And I loved working for this guy. It was my first CEO coming out of the military. And this guy, like, he got it. He understood how to run a global organization. We were running hard. And as a young general manager, man, I felt like this was fun. I had my own business. I was running my business. I made all the decisions on my own. I didn't have anyone from corporate looking over my shoulder. And we set records in growth and profitability. And then that same company culture 10 years later was all top down and metrics, and you had to get permission for everything, and if you failed, you were let go. And so the whole culture changed in that company just by a change in CEOs over the years. And it was really disappointing to see that. but one man could make a difference, or one CEO, one leader can make a difference in an organization by just that culture they put in the entire organization. So,
Yeah. I know it's so interesting when you talk to people and they expect perfection from their employees every
mm,
single hour of every single day. And I'm like, that's a lot of pressure on someone.
yeah, yeah.
And if you expect perfection, you're just not gonna see anything new. And eventually it will burn out.
Mm,
And I think, my team today and my team in the past, internationally, you had to get really used to messing up because, man, a lot of stuff got lost in translation.
oh yeah.
And so you would direct a team and then you go and you'd be like, okay, and they would say, but you said, and I'm like, yes, that word in English has 4 definitions. I picked this one, you picked that one. Not a problem. Now we know, and this is what it's going to look like.
Right.
So you had to get just really comfortable, messing up and
Yeah.
giving yourself grace and giving people grace around you. And
Yeah.
then it became okay. And therefore people were more open and honest.
I like it. I love it a lot. Well, very good. So 304 coaching, what is that all about? What do you do in your company?
So at 304, we focus on talent strategies, and
Okay.
we come in, we look at your we help you with your business strategy, figure out where you're going and what does that mean for your team. And so we make sure we have a great hiring tool, OAD. We have leadership academies, and we do executive and mid-management coaching, performance development coaching. So a full suite of just talent strategy, and we have a really great time doing it.
Excellent. Excellent. So what are you working on these days? What's on the slate today?
Oh, what I'm working on right now is a leadership academy for directors and above that's focused on conversation intelligence, which is about understanding our language and the neuroscience of the mind. And when I
Mm,
think about where we're going in the world, like we have to get smarter with how people actually work and get the most out of them and really helping them understand that. So we're working on a new academy. So we're really excited and putting the research into it. It's going to be a lot of fun.
wow, it sounds great. I think it's really needed today too. So excellent. So how can people find out more about you, your company, and all your coaching programs?
So you can go to 304coaching.com. We have lots of resources you can download for free there. And then love to connect with your listeners on LinkedIn at Jen Thornton ACC.
Okay. And we'll put all the links in our show notes so that everyone can find it okay. Well, this has been good. This has been a great conversation. You know, when we first booked it and you're the first HR professional on the show,
I'm
I
so
wondered how,
honored.
I was wondering how it was going to go since some of us in the leadership community sort of in the HR community sometimes don't jive. But I think you touched on a lot of the right things is that it is really true that the hiring and the development of your talent is just absolutely critical to the performance of your business and to maintaining your culture. And it's one of the number one things I do as a business owner is managing the group of people that I have working there and being really careful when I add to that. That's really, really important. And so I think you hit on the right things and you had the right answer when it comes to performance reviews. So
I'm
you
glad I
passed the
passed the
test.
test. Woo!
So you passed the
I
test.
got a dopamine hit for that, by the
Oh
way. I was
yes, you were
right.
right.
Yeah,
So
it felt really good. I'm going to try to be right later on too.
yeah, and I like that. I like that whole discussion about being, being addicted to being right, and the downfall of that is that, well, if you might be right, but then it's not the right decision for the company, and that's a bad thing. So I
Absolutely.
think you left us with a lot of things to think about, and I think you gave us a lot of good insight today.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm honored to be the very first HR professional on your podcast.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm sure someone's going to point out there was somebody else, but I'm pretty sure you're the first. So
I'm going to go with it. I'm going to stick with I was
I
the
am
first.
too. I'm going with it as well. So very good. Well, Jennifer, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. It was a ton of fun.
Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Till next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.